And I'm going to come back and talk about Palestine. I'm going to start it off because of what happened last weekend, with perhaps talking just briefly about what happened to me. So we are a political group. We went to a demonstration, and I think you'll be aware there have been huge mass demonstrations in London, Manchester, Liverpool, Birmingham, Coventry, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Dundee, Bristol. You can't, even small towns and cities, Colchester, Cambridge, Canterbury, Oxford, small cities where you don't think there being a militant working class population. But actually the militant working class are everywhere, and our media is very good at telling us our consciousness is something different than it really is, making us feel isolated and alone in our progressive ideas. But we're not alone, and it's quite clear that there's been a mass upsurge of sympathy for the Palestinian people. And certainly on the 11th of November, I participated in a demonstration which clearly there were at least 1 million people in that demonstration. A tidal wave of humanity swept through the streets, over Vauxhall Bridge, past MI5 headquarters to the American embassy, and they just kept on coming and coming for hour after hour. And it's inspiring to see the narrative of the uniform narrative of our politicians and media being totally challenged and disregarded, and people refusing to cow before it. So this demonstration is large, and it's a threat to our ruling class precisely because they rely on being able to lie to us and keep us in our place as their wage slaves, and not have us challenge their policy abroad or domestically on which their profit and their system rest. Each of us occupy that place. Each of us have to earn a living. Each of us struggle to feed and clothe our children. And if we step outside the allowed political narrative, there are real consequences. There are real consequences. You might lose your job. You might lose your ability to feed your children. That's going to clearly push you into the lowest depths of the working class. So that constant threat, speak up and suffer the consequences, is kind of ever present. And what our government clearly chose to do was trying to criminalise support for Palestine. And I think we all felt it when Suella Braverman was saying these are hate marches. Each time there was a march, she sat down with the police and said, you must crack down on these demonstrations. You're giving unfair, unequal policing. There's a massive rise in anti-Semitism. Of course, it's anti-Semitism if you equate opposition to the Israeli state and its crimes as racism, which is precisely what they're trying to do. And this is not new. Jeremy Corbyn, I don't know how many of you remember him. Not that long ago, he was the leader of the Labour Party. And at the time we said, look, her pal, my father, who was the leader of our party at that time, made a speech when Jeremy Corbyn was elected at a big meeting of the Indian Workers Association in Woolwich. People were quite enthused. They go, oh, look, it's happened. This thing that we're told is going to be the salvation of Britain when Labour Party is reclaimed by the left wing, happened. They've put this left winger, he's become miraculously in charge of Labour. It took a little while for the establishment to regroup and pick its tactic. But they chose to say, oh, you're a terrorist sympathiser. You have basically sided with, and they chose Ireland, the IRA. You apologise, you back down, no, don't. Oh, you're a pacifist. You won't use our nuclear bomb. Eventually said, I will use a nuclear bomb. I will. I mean, I don't want to, but I will if I have to. And you won't use drones first to strike down your enemy. Well, no, I don't. But I don't agree in extrajudicial murder. But I will use the drones. I will use the drones. Oh, you're not bloodthirsty enough on Syria. You must allow a free vote. Yeah, okay, fine. My backbenchers have the right to be as bloodthirsty as they like in support of imperialist adventures abroad. You support the dictator Maduro. I'm against violence on wherever it comes from. So back down on one thing after another. And finally they said, you support Palestine. You support these terrorists of the PLO. You support these terrorists of Hamas. I don't support Hamas. You support Palestine. You're an anti-Semite. And this was the biggest one, wasn't it? You're a racist. You're a Jew hater. Your solidarity with Palestine is anti-Semitism. And it was at the same point they started pushing very hard. This organisation appeared from the ether, never existed before, IHRA, International Holocaust Remembrance Association, and they pushed very hard a new definition of anti-Semitism. So, what is racism? What is racism? It's discrimination or hatred towards a certain racial group. And that basically covers it, doesn't it? Yeah? If I'm, against Pakistanis, it's quite clear when I speak and denounce people as either their national or religious or racial group what I'm talking about. But they wanted to change that. They want to say, no, that's not what anti-Semitism is. It's not being against Jews. It's comparing the Holocaust, by which they only mean one historical Holocaust. Because let's be honest, there have been many historical Holocausts. Imperialism is punctuated through its whole period of colonization by Holocaust. The USA was built on a Holocaust of the indigenous people. Australia was built on a Holocaust of the indigenous people. There have been Holocausts sponsored by our government. When they wanted to overthrow Indonesia, run by Sukarno, a bastion of national liberation and internationalism, they sponsored one of its generals. They orchestrated a massacre of 3 million, probably communists. Was that a Holocaust? Was that a genocide? Well, yeah, it is a systematic wiping out of the leadership of a people who are leading it towards independence in order to impose your regime. Is Vietnam a Holocaust? If you murder 4 or 5 million people in order to stop the spread of an ideology in a government and independence, is that a Holocaust? Yes, it is. Was Korea a Holocaust? If you go to war against the people, if you bomb them into the Stone Age and you say it'll take them 1,000 years to rebuild Pyongyang, if you plan nuclear attacks against the people to keep them in slavery and subjection. So the entire system of imperialism is built on one Holocaust after another. But no, we want to make it illegal to compare what the Nazis did only to the Jews and to compare that with anything else. That's anti-Semitism. Forgetting, also writing out that history, well, the Nazis arose to suppress the working class. They arose to suppress communists. That was their original mission. The first people who went through the gas chambers were communists, Russian communists. They wiped out 27 million Slavs. Is wiping out 27 million Slavs not historically important? You can't compare any of these historical crimes of any group of imperialists. The British, oversaw perhaps the death of 80 million Indians in their colonization of India through famine to enforce slavery. So our history is awash with these crimes. But they want to indemnify Israel and its particular crimes. So that's one thing. You can't compare the Holocaust of the Nazis against the Jews with any other historical act. That is anti-Semitism. You can't compare the crimes of Israel with any other repressive regime, particularly German Nazism. And it is an irony. There's no question that it's an irony that the victims of European history, one of the victims of European history, not just one, because there are many, the Jewish population of Europe should be encouraged to move to Palestine and act as a settler colonial regime. But if you implant a settler colonial regime and it commits crimes, then it's absolutely legitimate both to defend yourself against those crimes and to criticize it for doing so. So the IHRA came and they essentially wanted to say any criticism of Israel, any criticism of Zionism is racist. And that doesn't have legal force. But eventually they battered and battered and battered Labour until they adopted it. So the Labour Party currently have adopted it. The Tory Party have adopted it. Businesses adopt it. Institutions adopt it. Councils adopt it. They want to enforce it. And what does that mean? It means that whatever crime Israel commits, you can't criticise it. And you risk being labelled racist. And of course, being racist these days is not something that you can just say, oh, we used to live in a state where it was acknowledged that the state was racist. The police are institutionally racist. Britain as a colonial power was racist because what is the ideology of colonialism? How do you justify going to other people's countries, dominating them, overthrowing their government, subverting their will, keeping them in slavery? Well, you have to have an ideology to base it. And that basic, ideology of European colonialism was racism. But here's an interesting thing. So our government learned to turn it on its head and accuse the masses of being racist towards it. Just as they accuse, and when they look at the current conflict that's going on in Palestine, this stage of the conflict, they want to put all the blame on Hamas. It's all Hamas. They want to write out of history the long-term crimes and history of Israeli Zionism and their own crimes. Because in indemnifying Israel, they seek to indemnify and prevent criticism of British imperialism, US imperialism, and their wider crimes to colonize the Middle East. So what actually happened to me is we went with a book, and this is the book. Can you see that, Dex?
Yeah.
So this is the book, and it's called Zionism, a racist, anti-Semitic, and reactionary tool of imperialism. And if you look at this book, it has a few pictures in it. It has a picture here of young children in Israel who are encouraged to, and this is of a previous incursion into Gaza, encouraged to sign missiles and shells which are going to be fired into the civilian population of Gaza. It has pictures of children, really toddlers, who are being fought to fire heavy weaponry and heavy machinery, of the Israeli Defense Forces, so-called. Everything, about this occupation is turned on its head. They label the aggressive Israeli forces defending themselves from anti-Semitism. They label the Palestinians who are resisting 75-year war of occupation and genocide as being the aggressors. But if you look, you don't have to look very hard, to see the T-shirts that the Israeli Defense Force wear and sell to each other. They joke about killing pregnant women. And there's an IDF T-shirt which is very popular. And it's a woman, pregnant woman, wearing a hijab, but a pregnant woman, so a pregnant Palestinian woman, in the crosshairs of a sniper sights. And it says, 1 shot, 2 kills. You kill a pregnant woman, you've killed 2 terrorists, 2 Arabs. This is inhuman. Is it a fascist outlook? Yes, it absolutely is. How can you define fascism? A total disregard for human life. A total disregard for the sanctity of childhood, of womanhood, of pregnancy, of new life. That your goal is to wipe a population off the face of the earth. Gaza exists as this 2.3 million population, so densely packed precisely because of the result of previous waves of ethnic cleansing. And it's quite clear that Netanyahu and his current absolutely fascist government of Zionist Israel are determined to complete their ethnic cleansing. If they're enforcing a mass transfer of 1.7 million people from the north to the south of Gaza, if they're openly saying their real desire is to push them outside the border of Gaza into Sinai, into northern Egypt, what does that mean? They want to finish the job of ethnic cleansing. Simultaneously, Hamas was elected. It's the democratic representative of the people of Gaza in free and fair elections. Do they have the right to choose their own representation? Well, according to Israel and international law, no. According to our government, no. It's a prescribed organization. Are they doing the same thing on West Bank where there's no Hamas? Yes, they're doing the same thing. Perhaps not, quite so systematic a genocide, but a slow genocide, a slow colonization. We've seen an increase in settler colonial violence against the people of the West Bank, an increase in expulsions, burning of villages, expulsion of the Palestinian people. The very flag of Israel is the Star of David between 2 blue lines. Those blue lines are meant to represent Eretz Israel, and they represent, on the one hand, the Nile, and on the other hand, Euphrates. It's an expansionist, colonialist enterprise. And this book tells that history. It tells that history of the ideology of how Zionism was a marginal philosophy which was thought useful to a group of Victorians. Speaking of Margaret Thatcher, who wanted to reintroduce Victorian ideology, she has done so. Victorians thought they could implant a settler colonial population into their newly colonized territories which fell to them after World War I, which was fought essentially over the division of the world. And when they defeated Turkey, they stole her colonies. That's why they fought World War I. It wasn't because of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. It's because they wanted more territories to dominate, exploit, more money to make. But once you have those territories, how do you rule them? And the secret to ruling territories is to divide and conquer, to engender an ongoing conflict, religious conflict in India, Muslim, Hindu. We're still seeing the legacy of that. In Palestine, different things, but different people. In Lebanon, the French gave relative privilege to the Christian population and set up an ongoing ethnocentric state, which still is reflected in Lebanon today. In Israel, they implanted a settler population, and the Zionist organization, the Balfour Declaration, comes from that explicit agreement with very powerful representatives of the Zionists. We will help you there to set up a loyal Jewish Ulster. in a sea of potentially hostile Arabism. So this entire state was set up as a dagger, as our book says. The Zionist state of Israel is a dagger aimed at the heart of the Arab people's revolutionary democratic movement. At the same time, it subjugated mentally a large proportion of the world's Jews, people who are formally to be found in the front ranks of every democratic and socialist movement. So this tells the story of the original colonization, the way in which that ideology was used. It tells you that those who wanted that settler colonial policy to work appealed not to the mass or to humanity or to justice. They appealed precisely to the world's leading criminal imperial powers, and were ultimately successful with USA and with Britain. We sponsored that group and set them up. But during the World War II, the Zionists, despite the Nazi ideology of the fascists in Germany, who unquestionably saw Jews, amongst others, as inferior human beings, and that was their avowed policy. Despite that, the Zionists saw that to their advantage. They said, this is to our advantage. We don't think Jews belong in Europe. We want Jews to move and resettle our own national homeland. And therefore, our policy coincides. We want to fight those who seek our friends, who want to uphold our rights. And we want to shake hands with our enemies who want us to leave. Because actually, that's what the ideology we want to push on the Jewish mass. And they were very happy to make a deal with Nazism called the Havara, the transfer agreement, which allowed movement of both people and capital. It became a large banking house, which allowed the movement of people from Germany to implant them in Palestine. And so it documents the crimes and the collaboration in crimes of the Zionists at a very high level of leadership, the founders of the State of Israel, even with Nazi Germany. And it goes into great detail. And this was even reflected in court cases within Israel after the war, because it was clearly a great embarrassment and a great shame that Jews and the self-proclaimed leaders of the Jews, the Zionists, which they weren't the leaders of the whole Jewish movement, but the Zionists would collaborate with the people who had just committed this Holocaust. It was deeply embarrassing. And so this deals with principally Jewish authors telling that story. And it gives you some idea why it is. Moving from that history, well, that's a long time ago. What about how things are? It gives you an idea of the settler colonial mindset of Israel, how its most rabid leaders still think this is a land promised to them by God, how they can justify any crime, how when they've expelled all of the Palestinians as clearly as their current mission, both in their genocide in Gaza and their ethnic cleansing in the West Bank, they want to push out the remaining Arabs from their land. They will never succeed in doing it. The Palestinians have refused to become a victim of history. And we really have to congratulate the Palestinian resistance for its heroic decision not to become the victim of history, not to let the international policy of imperialism normalize relations with Israel. The Saudis were on the brink of normalizing relations with Israel, just quietly forgetting the Palestinian question. But once the Israelis do ethnically cleanse Israel, that won't be the end of the war. There's still an ongoing power in antagonism with their neighbors. And so it's quite clear that while we welcome this ceasefire, we welcome a relent in the crimes of the Israeli army towards the Palestinian people, that a lasting peace was not something we're looking at. And a lasting peace isn't something you can look at while the state, which is a supremacist state, which indemnifies itself against any crime, whose minister, whose security minister can come out and say, when we're talking about the Palestinian people, we're dealing with human animals and we must treat them accordingly. Are these not fascist statements? Are they not the statements of a fascist? You're a human animal. You're subhuman. Whatever we do to you is not a crime. There's no crime that we can't commit. If we bomb your mosques, your hospitals, your schools, your parks, your playgrounds, your UN relief centres, if we bomb your administration and government centres, are these legitimate targets in any war? So these are crimes. So Israel is involved in crimes, and more than that, our government indemnify them, absolutely. and back them up precisely because they are one agent, not the only agent, one agent of their wider colonization of the Middle East. And this is the relationship that we see and we expose. And when a vast mass of people are coming onto our streets and they're angry about the crimes Israel's committing, we have a powerful weapon in our hand. And that weapon is the truth. Because what we can say is this is not an accident. Just as poverty is not an accident. This is one plank of actually keeping this criminal system in place. The working people of Britain, the working class of Britain have no reason to side with this genocide. What are we fed? What does Priti Patel, what is, who went and of course did deals in Israel? What is Suella Braverman? Why are these people of Indian origin so keen that we should be friends of Israel? Because they are servants of an elite business class. There's nothing that the working people of Britain have to gain by being allied to these policies, which simply serves to increase the power of those who oppress us at home and keep us in poverty at home. So when we go onto the streets with this, I don't think it's an accident, that we're singled out. I think the police have had their eye on us for some time. I think they're worried about the knowledge that we have to bring to working people. They're worried that we could get the ear of a mass movement and bring them to knowledge. But I think, like Mao Zedong said, the imperialists lift rocks to drop them on their own feet. And if they sought to isolate from the masses by frightening the masses, by saying the support of Palestine is anti-Semitic, or saying that this book is outlawed, or the truth is outlawed, history is outlawed, they have achieved precisely the reverse, because despite their censorship of accounts, thousands of people have been drawn in their attention towards us. Hundreds of these pamphlets have been sold. More and more people are queuing up to come and join our organisation, to become supporters of the organisation, have given money to help fund our work, and are prepared to stand up and be counted. And that is why what our position is that the working class are not helpless victims. Just as the Palestinians don't have to be, accept that they're just going to be written out of history and quietly go into the night and allow the genocide to happen. In fact, they only reclaim their humanity through their resistance. In a similar way, the working people of Britain cowed by the cost of living crisis. There are many people who wanted to come to this meeting who can't afford to come, and yet are too proud to accept a bit of assistance with their travel fares to get here. But collectively, the working class has a lot of power. We can help each other. Working people know that in life, we have to rely on each other. We look after each other's kids. We feed each other. We buy each other drinks. When we're down on our luck, we take care of each other. This is a collective act of resistance. There's no reason that we should suffer that indignity. And yet, our dignity can sometimes be used against us. We've got to learn to contribute. Those who contribute money can contribute money. Those who contribute time can contribute time. But we must develop a leadership for the working class. What we lack, we've got like a one-point program. The working class need leadership who really give a damn about the working class. There's no question that humanity can't solve, but currently we're not set up. Humanity and its institutions are not set up to solve the problems. They're set up to perpetuate them. And at the centre of that really is, in Britain, our real problem we have with this party, the Labour Party. The Labour Party put their hand on all of workers and class resistance and turn it into ashes and dust. If we wanted to stop the war in Palestine, we can stop it. And our comrades, and we really must salute them and give them a round of applause from Palestine Action, have been showing us just how that can be done. And port workers all around the planet have been showing how that can be done. These war machines, they don't work unless at least a section of the working class run them. The capitalists are few. If there are 6 billionaires who control the planet, they control it via their wealth, by paying the wages of workers. But the workers still have to actually go along with it. You know, when I was being arrested, when I actually had that book on the stall, we had a stall, nothing happened. Police came talking to us. Then they said, oh no, we've been ordered back, we have to confiscate the books. And I've recorded that and have a look online. You can see the conversation I had with them, at which I explained to the policeman how he's enforcing political policing. He goes, no, because it's been decided by someone that it's a crime. I said, no, you can say it's criminal, but this is political policing. And it's interesting because in a very real sense, it's the death of free speech in Britain. I was like, oh, okay. But he has to, at the end of the day, go along with his orders and not engage his brain to think about what he's asked to do. And the same for the weapons, the same for the soldiers, the same for the manufacturers of the weapons, the same for the people who print propaganda, the same for the people who distribute it, the same for the people who technologically run the cameras. And, you know, every aspect of life in Britain is run for the capitalists, but it's run by the workers. And if the workers develop their own moral, their own brain, their own party capable of, that they trust and that they send their best sons and daughters to really run a collective act of resistance and solidarity, the working class is mighty, and with a flick of its muscle it can sweep away the system and put in place a just and beneficent order in which we're no longer complicit in these crimes. I'm gonna wrap it up. This book documents, in particular, the history of the Labour Party. It's systematic betrayal of the cause of working people of Britain. There's a myth that that it's going to be the centre of a socialist movement, a socialist renaissance, a socialist revival. If the episode of Corbyn's leadership tells us anything, it's that this machine of the Labour Party is stronger even than a so-called well-intentioned individual. And a so-called well-intentioned individual is nothing unless he systematically educates working people and forms a leadership and an organisation capable of withstanding the force of capital. I haven't been able to go into all the history of Israel, of Palestine and the Middle East. But if you look at this book, this is Imperialism in the Middle East by Harpal, Bra and Ella Rule, our founding and current chairman of the party. And this book, Imperialism and War, these are available on our website too. And they're thick books, so you can see that. You don't have to read all of them. You can read them section by section. But these books deal with thoroughly the history of Palestine, the Nakba, the Stern Gang, Ben Gurion, where those states came from, the crimes that they've committed, the first Intifada, and right up to really the present day. And I'd encourage you to get hold of them. And in terms of the wider picture of how this fits in with our situation at home, with the poverty of the British workers, then really you need to get hold of this book. This is Imperialism. Lenin gave us the definition of what imperialism is. It's not an individual act. It's not just going to other people's countries and nicking their stuff, although that is an important part of it, and it's the part that's obvious and sticks out. It is the act of, a monopoly capitalism which dominates all life on earth, in the rich countries, in the poor countries, which production of the basic needs of humanity, which we all need, doesn't take place unless they make profit out of it. And because of that, how wealth being concentrated in ever fewer hands and poverty being given to the mass of humanity dislocates the entire process of production, because you can't make a profit from someone who's got nothing. I can't sell, and they have this idea of microbanking. People are so poor that the whole world's problem will be solved by microbanking, tiny transactions for poorer and poorer people by their mobile phones. Well, what when the people have got nothing? When they can't have a mobile phone, when they haven't got 3 cents to rub together? The nonsense that capitalism is going to take the poor out of poverty. No, it's not. All of these things serve to further increase the polarization of wealth, and they're making the problem worse. It's an inherent problem of capitalism. And nationalization under our state doesn't solve the problem. We have to put power in the hands of working people, and that means economic power, and it means that looking at actually who owns the wealth. Always, when Corbyn used to come on and just even promise free internet, remember that? I wouldn't mind free internet. It's not the end of my problems, but internet's become like a basic necessity. We all need internet. So, free internet, let's have that. But of course, it's not his to give. He can't give it. He's not allowed to give it. He's removed. Before you divide up the resources of the world, you have to look at who currently owns them. And you have to be unashamed. To solve humanity's problems, we're going to have to remove by force if necessary. Actually, very little force is needed once we make our minds up, because we are the many, and they really are the infinitesimal fraction of the population, the few. You have to make up your minds that actually it's not morally justified, and it's the cause of humanity's problem for all of our wealth and all of our labour to be monopolised by this tiny group of international gangsters whose interests are represented by the City of London, by Wall Street, by the Bourse, by international capital. These are our enemies. They are the enemies of the Palestinian people. They are the ones who make those wounds. They are the enemies of the British working people who keep us in poverty, keep us worrying about where our next meal is going to come from, and stop us from living peaceful, secure, prosperous, productive lives and using the talent of humanity. And all workers have talent. Let them never convince you that we live in a meritocracy where if you were only more talented, if you were only more gifted, then you'd do better. And it's just sour grapes on your part that you want to change how things are. It's absolute nonsense. We can have a better order. You guys are the ones who are going to do it. You in the room, I'm glad to see so many of you, and you at home, make common cause with us, meet us, join us, get involved, help us to build this organisation, and we will have, humanity can have and will have and deserves to have a bright future. Thank you so much. We can probably have a Q&A, and I don't mind if we kind of live stream a little bit of the Q&A unless it becomes just too tedious and everyone's had enough. So if anyone wants to come and ask their question on camera, they can. If they want to ask anonymously from the hall, they can. But if anyone wants to talk about either heating and eating, the Palestine question, or just has a contribution they'd like to make from the floor, come up if you'd like to make it on camera, or just you can make it anonymously from the hall. And thank you all for coming. Christina, do you want to come? Would you mind coming up?
I don't mind.
Do you want to stand at the rostrum? Why don't you stand there? Is that okay?
Oh dear.
Or do you want to sit down?
I will stand wherever I can be visible.
How's that? Is that all right, Dex?
Thank you so much, both, for the just excellent, inspiring, touching on so many levels. Ranjit, I think that was one of the finest speeches you've ever given.
Well, thank you.
And I think the way you were able to link what is felt in the body of the working class, in the everyday lives, from the children to the parents, to the, in every day, to what is happening to Palestine, and the dignity that is under attack, the dignity that is fighting against the inhumanity. And I think there is something, this is what I want to say. We are very vulnerable when we are individuals. And all these crises, they're trying to convince us that it's because of our own mistakes. Because we haven't fitted into the system. We haven't really integrated. Maybe we missed a degree, or a second degree, or a third degree, or more experience. And because they have now targeted someone like you, a surgeon with so many years of experience, who is able to offer his skills to save lives. And that doesn't make any difference to the state repression. I think people realize, what is going on. And it's an eye-opener. We are not the working class. The moment it is able, like Joshua, to talk about its plight, it starts exhibiting consciousness. And this is what I'm most afraid of, because once you have consciousness, you are not an individual. You have a common identity that unites us. And this is what the target is, basically. Both for the crisis at home and the crisis that we see, at an international, global level, extreme crisis, which is, let's face it, beginnings of a Third World War. Yes, it's getting there. And of course, we're going to start feeling it more at home. Mm-hmm. So the two together, I don't know of any other political organization more articulate in being able to connect them. and make people aware of how urgent it is to organize. And I think that Palestine causes a spark. We've never seen so many kids, families, working class people in that 11th of November march. And of course, they're starting to repress it after that, because it starts getting dangerous. You know how many people had on this stall on the 11th of November? And we were there with our kids, it's getting dangerous, so they'll have to start repressing it. And the reason it gets dangerous is because of the consciousness it brings. And I was personally, as a cadre, inspired to see how you dealt with it. We do not run, we have done nothing wrong.
You're not a cadre, you're our leader, Christina.
Well, I am. I am a vice chair, and I'm very proud. You know, you can be very despondent, feel very victimized by what is happening in terms of the poverty that we are facing, but also they will come after the communists. And you have said, and all the comrades who were arrested, they gave us a very inspiring example. We are not alone. We act as an organization. We are stronger. We're getting stronger. We'll get more people, and we are able to defend our decency as working class people, but also as internationalists. We are not ashamed to show our solidarity with the resistance. And we know who the enemy is. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Join us.
Join us. Please do join us.
I think Christina picked out something really, really useful there. This seminar today was never intended to be a joint poverty and Palestine seminar. Obviously, with the current upsurge of the people's liberation efforts in Palestine, we wanted to obviously educate people on that, and also to draw people in who've been brought to our analysis because of this. But like Christina said, I think it perfectly alloys with the talk on poverty too. Because as more and more people, British workers, are hitting the streets, and they're realising that the petty divisions between us and the Palestinian people are just that petty, and they're invented. A difference of skin colour, religion, location, race, however way you want to put it. They're paper thin. They can go up in smoke. And when people are hitting the streets and they're seeing our politicians talk about the Palestinian people with such callous disregard, it doesn't take a great leap for anybody who can empathise to put themselves not only in the position of the Palestinian people, but to wonder what would happen if the same people who are visiting this destruction of the Palestinian people turned a fraction of it back on us to maintain their positions. And it's a wake-up call. For the most advanced people, they already know what the bourgeois are capable of doing to enforce this system. But when we can truly put ourselves in another person's shoes, and again, some people here are from that area of the world, but I'm definitely not. But I feel that I'm with the Palestinian people. I can't be there, I can't help them, I can't save a damn one of them. But when I see these videos and these pictures of these people destroyed and blown apart, and again, contrasted with a callous disregard of not only the people doing it directly, but the people that are okay to go along with this, it ignites an anger in me. And because I see myself in that position too, I know that I'm not safe because I'm white, or I live in Britain, or I have a wage coming in. They can snatch that away from me and do maybe more. I mean, our recent comrades faced repression for merely being near a book which talked about the history of this thing. And if they can do that now at this level, then the conditions, not only the living conditions, but also the repression that our brothers and sisters in the oppressed will face, we could face that too. And if that isn't a call to arms, and if that doesn't make you furious, I don't know what will. So keep your eyes on this.
Defeat to imperialism and victory to the resistance.
Victory to the resistance.
Any other questions or contributions? There are many people in the room who are never short of something to say. We really invite you to come up and have this opportunity for you to say what you think should be said. So please don't be shy. I mean, it was interesting, our recent experience of the demonstrations, because they have been vibrant, and it's never been easier to distribute literature to the mass of those people. They're hungry for knowledge. They're angry and they want to know what's happening. And we do have those answers. So in the stall we had on the 11th of November, we just put out books, and I think we sold hundreds of books. We sold hundreds of books. It's hard sometimes to sell a single paper. We're in an atmosphere where we're selling hundreds of books. And that is dangerous to the state. And I think it's precisely for that reason that they have targeted us and decided to clamp down on us. But precisely in clamping down on us, they're achieving the opposite, because now we're selling hundreds of books almost daily online. We're running out of stock. We're having to reprint our books. And a lot of people will join us. So if there's anyone in the room who has not yet decided fully to throw their lot in with us, please redouble your efforts. Please do so. And at home, people streaming this. There's unquestionably a lot of repression of our social media. I'm quite sure. Sometimes I see in a day, I look who was the last person, on my Twitter feed who had followed me on the account. And I look the next day and I count, and there's like 300 people, but my following's gone down by 5. So it's not like a figment of my imagination. Of course, it's theoretically possible all those people just left, but they're systematically unfollowed. They systematically black your algorithm. Recently, I wanted to spread a tweet. I messaged it to my direct friends and contacts, and they're telling me, "Oh, it's very hard to get through. I had to click through 3 things where it warned me of suspicious content and all that." So there are ways in which you go, "Oh, it's your imagination. Or maybe it's just not very popular what you're saying." But they're trying to put a firewall between our organisation and the British working class. That is failing, and it's failing precisely because we're not just a social media organisation, we're a real organisation. We're building real branches on the ground. We have people up and down the length of the country, and I want everyone to think about how they can help us to build those branches, help us to make our party an active force in the working class movement. If you look at the bail conditions, they were quite interesting, because they tell you in a way what our government's afraid of. One, I'm not allowed to distribute literature at demonstrations. Papers. We've got our latest paper. Can someone get me a latest Proletarian from somewhere? We got beautiful literature, which comes out regularly. If you look at our website and go to our website, which is www.thecommunists, with an S, thecommunists.org, okay, you'll see that we bring out papers regularly. And these articles are continually coming, okay? Why our government backs Gaza genocide. This is about my arrest, and the fact they want to ban this book. They want to ban it because they don't want you to know it. You look at the fact that we're calling for an actual movement of non-cooperation, that Britain can stop the war, that we're calling for victory to the Palestinian people. We refuse to condemn Hamas. Every bloody interview I turn on, the only question that whoever gets repeatedly asked is, but do you condemn Hamas? But do you condemn Hamas? Wasn't it a genocide? Isn't it a terrible act of anti-Semitism? Well, it's not an act of anti-Semitism to defend yourself. If we're going to applaud something, we should applaud that. It's not an act of anti-Semitism to defend yourself against genocide. Okay, about the Manchester branch who called for victory of the resistance, and they've been suspended from their own organisation, the Palestinian Solidarity Organisation. So the way in which our solidarity movements themselves are being politically policed, and you'll find Labour Party at the bottom of it. Okay, about the resistance fighters in Gaza, about the BBC, about the war crime that our BBC commits in its propaganda of war, okay? And it goes on, and there's analysis after analysis. So about our school children, and about our international work, okay? We recently commemorated the 50th anniversary of the massacre at the Polytechnic committed by the fascist junta, but it was the signal that led to the overthrow of that fascist junta. And our work trying to revitalise the international communist movement and the workers in resistance goes hand in hand with our local prosaic work of educating workers and building our branches and becoming a force, and our open letter to the CPB, which we distributed. And actually, I've got to say, a lot of comrades from the CPB have reached out to us in general and to me personally, precisely because they agree that the Labour Party is the problem and they want their own organisation to discard this. And if their organisation is incapable of discarding it, I invite them to just ditch the organisation and cross the lines, as so many of you have, and more of you will, and just come and join us, because the work is urgent and it needs to be done, and we can't be hamstrung. We've got Alex who would like to make a contribution. Alex, can I invite you to the front to speak? Would that be all right?
Usually I'm loud enough without it. But, thank you, comrades, for coming down today, and thanks to the two comrades who've given such excellent presentations. My name's Alex. If you don't know me, I'm down from the Greater Manchester region, where we're just getting going with the party's activities across Manchester and the rest of the North West. I wanted just to raise a point about the theme of today, which is the link between imperialism and, of course, the increasing grinding poverty faced by many working class people right here at home. But the image that Comrade Josh has in his presentation of the poor child who was killed by the system, as he correctly said, reminded me of a point that needs to be emphasized, which is that for the next generation, and even for the generations living now, capitalism in Britain offers absolutely no future. Nothing positive can come of it. Its positive role in the historical process is over. All it can offer now to working class people, and an increasing number even from the middle class, is a descent into poverty and desperation. And I think it's often the case that when you become a convinced, whether you call yourself a socialist or a communist or some kind of Marxist, for many years you say the only solution is revolution, but perhaps you don't quite understand the meaning of that. And I think, speaking personally, I said those words for many, many years, perhaps not without understanding them. But now, looking at the increasing poverty in Britain and the savagery which the imperialists are inflicting in Gaza and elsewhere across the world, you can see that the only vision that the British ruling class and the American ruling class have for the future is one of unmitigated savagery overseas, and a different form of savagery, but perhaps no less effective from their point of view, at home. And it's time that many of us sort of shed the perhaps unwillingness in the past to directly say to people that, well, the only solution is a revolution. The only solution is the overturning of this system. There is no way it can be put back together again. We are not going back to the glorious social democratic heyday of 1945 to 1951. That's all gone. It's not coming back, and nor should we desire to bring it back either, because the cost for those reforms was paid for in the blood of many that were repressed abroad. And I think, as Comrade Ranjit has pointed out, the number of people who have been stirred into action by their horror at what is being done in Gaza by US imperialism, it should be said. Israel is the proxy here. Israel is the colonial project of British imperialism and US imperialism. But people stirred by their opposition to that savagery are becoming politicized and can start to draw the links between their own situation and the situation of the millions who are oppressed overseas. And that needs to be drummed home to everybody, just how bad things are going to get. And they're going to get worse in Britain when Sir Keir Starmer, always important to award him his proper title, he did a lot to earn it after all. When Sir Keir Starmer becomes Prime Minister, if indeed he does, he will be worse than Rishi Sunak. There's no doubt about that. He is the more effective evil for the British ruling class, because he, like many other Labour leaders before him, will be able to lean upon the relationship the Labour Party has with the trade union bureaucracy to crush working class struggles, to crush the initiative of workers from the ground up inside the trade unions. We've seen it already in the last year. How many struggles of the trade union movement have been sold out? We've had the postal workers sold out. There's an argument that certain sections of the rail workers are being sold out. We've had the nurses sold out, and a myriad of others as well. And why? It's because of the relationship between the Labour Party and the hierarchy of the trade union movement. That's why. So we need to be absolutely unafraid of saying to workers, look, I think most workers know that voting for Keir Starmer is a completely useless endeavour. Nobody really believes that he's going to make anything any better. Perhaps some writers for the Guardian comment pages believe that, but they number about 5 people. So most workers know very well that Keir Starmer and the Labour Party offer them nothing. The point to get to is to, as others have made the correct point, the level of class consciousness in Britain is so low because it has been deliberately suppressed for over 40 years, as long as many of us in this room have been alive, from a high point in the early 1970s to the low point now. Our job as communists is to try and develop that consciousness back to the point where the working class is not only aware of itself as a class, but is aware of itself as being, by necessity, in conflict with the parasitic ruling class which sits atop the country. And to do that, you need an organised communist party. You can't do it outside of it, can't do it as an anarchist. I've tried, it didn't work out very well. But more seriously, I would say, as somebody who's only joined the party in the last year, I would encourage everybody who hasn't joined already to think about doing so quite seriously, talk to those of us who have, and let's get active in building the organisation, because if you look across the barren desert called the British left, all you see is treason and sellouts and pathetic utopianism, and the working class does not need any of that, does not want any of that, and quite rightly so. So thank you, comrades, for the great presentations today, and for everybody who's coming down, everybody who's watching online. And again, I think it's time to be absolutely unashamed to say that the only solution is revolution, and we must see one in our time.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for that contribution, Alex. That was fantastic, and appreciate your appeal. Just before Peter speaks, Alex is someone who has come through a school of many different organisations, trade unions and the left, and he knows what he's talking about. And so his appeal should have some attention paid to it. And he still has a considerable following and a considerable influence, and we would appeal to his followers please to heed his words and think very seriously about throwing your lot in with us. There's a natural tendency, I'm sorry Peter to have you up here, there's a natural tendency to wait and see. We've all got that, wait and see how it goes, and we'll jump on at the final moment when the scale's decisively tipped in our favour, and we'll associate with the winner. But if we wait, if the working class will wait, if they hope that someone's going to turn up and save them, we're never going to reach that point. So a certain point has to come where even if you're not fully, you don't know everything about the organisation and everyone in it and every policy, and you've got some reservations, that you've got to go with your heart and realise actually these people are serious. They're probably the only ones who are serious. They've got serious people among them, and they can become a decisive force if I throw my lot in with them. If you don't, we won't, and it won't be our fault alone. We got to do this together. So, Peter.
Thank you very much for a really inspiring presentation. I think it's interesting. I'm quite involved in the campaign to free Julian Assange, and it's interesting how these things are all part of one continuum, really. And but what I really want to say, I'm Jewish by background, and I haven't been practicing since shortly after my bar mitzvah at the age of 13. But certainly, if I hear anyone being anti-Semitic, then I take it personally. And I think one of the interesting things about this terrible genocide being committed by the Israeli government is that even if one is a non-practicing Jew, you're kind of at a subconscious level kind of indoctrinated with the idea that Israel in some way represents the worldwide Jewish diaspora, and even, I've never wanted to go to Israel and certainly never identified with it in any way. But as I say, at some subconscious level, it's sort of portrayed as some kind of idealistic realization of Jewish aspirations, which I think, to be frank, it's quite difficult to shake off. But given the recent tragic murderous events, I think it's certainly shaken that off for me, and I suspect for many other Jewish people. And as I think Josh alluded to, perhaps now one can go back to a sort of more authentic form of Judaism, a tradition of Judaism, which is a kind of intellectual and socialist vigor on a worldwide scale, and not a pathetic supremacist state. So thank you.
Peter, thanks so much. A very moving contribution. And let just make it absolutely clear for, like, you know, not for you, Peter, for slow learners, for anyone who thinks otherwise, there's not a bone of racism or discrimination in the body of myself. There's not a bone of racism or discrimination in any of our publications. There's nothing but respect for all of humanity and its positive contribution that it has to play and the working masses. But that's not to say that groups of humanity aren't badly used. It's a bit like when you look at Nazi Germany. They're all workers, ultimately, who are in the Nazi armies. If we want to defeat them, we would love to have a peaceful way to get rid of war, a utopian dream of bringing peace. But there are imperialist agents. There are the very wealthy who pull the strings behind the movements of governments and armies. And the idea that we can bring peace to the world without getting rid of the capitalists who pull those strings is a false one. So our opposition to the Israeli state is because of its role. We don't have this kind of obsession that the Jews run our gut. It's not like that. It's one particular state that was set up as a settler colonial enterprise by our government. It's British and US, it's Anglo-American capitalists who are the evil force. If you're looking for a conspiracy, and conspiracy theories abound, and of course they're not conspiracies if they're true, as I'm often told whenever I say, don't say conspiracy theory. You know, people are looking for a joined up theory of why the world's a mess. The joined up theory is capitalism. The joined up theory is imperialism. Anyone who really wants to understand, you know, why the Twin Tower bombings happen, why huge terrorist events happen, why the world's at war when we have enough to produce, like the Tracy Chapman song, when there's enough to feed the world. Why? They have to understand their economic basis and the people who really benefit from it. And they're a class who are criminals, and their ancestors have been criminals, and their entire political enterprise is maintaining this inequality and status quo. And Israel is just one manifestation of it. Saudi is another manifestation of it. Very different, all right? So we're not against one particular people, one particular enterprise. We are against exploitation. We're against inequality. We're against oppression of the working people. So thank you for sharing that moving testimony, because you're right. Because you're right. And as it says, you know, this book describes the Zionization of Judaism and the Judaization of Zionism. Because Zionism is not initially a Jewish ideology. It was an ideology that was implanted amongst the Jewish people. And the Holocaust, which was a terrible event, and we commemorate it and the victims of it, just as we do of all other human massacres, was used as moral capital for the crimes of the Israelis. And this is what imperialism does again and again. It uses its past crimes to justify its present crimes, and it seeks always to perpetuate its exploitation. So thanks again for sharing that very moving testimony. Are you sure? You sure? Do you want to speak from there or from here? No problem.
Hi, so my name is Ethan, and in terms of talking about why we need to have a communist party in this country now, as a 16-year-old, I'm often asked, why on earth would I come to such an event like this with my time? Why would I spend my weekend talking to a bunch of old people, basically? Why would I do this?
I'm young. What are you talking about?
What is the urgency, especially if Marxism teaches us that socialism, the capitalist world is barreling towards socialism? Why would I come out of my house and come here today? It's simply one of the main reasons that I want to do this is due to what I've been reading in terms of the climate and the urgency that we need to make massive changes in the whole world, and particularly in Britain, but in the whole world, not just to fight the poverty and the disease and the struggle that we're having from the cost of living crisis, etc. in Britain, but also the impending complete disaster that's coming to not just humanity, but every living creature on our entire planet from climate change. The simple point is, there's not much time left with that. I'm here because of material conditions, of course, but one of those main material conditions and the reasons that I chose to come into a position where I put myself in such vulnerability to the point where I end up being arrested for these beliefs is simply because there isn't much time. From reading about climate change and the scientific consequences of what's going to happen, there are a few main problems that, as any Marxist would understand, you have to look at the whole to understand anything at all. If we look at, say, pollution coming into our oceans, it's not just the oceans getting dirty, but the oceans, the very makeup of those oceans is permanently changing. In 1950, the pH, the acidity, how much acid is in the ocean, was 8.3. Today, that's come to 8.05. If it reaches 7.9, every human will die. Every human will die. And nothing is being done to change that. As someone who's young, I'm going to have to live through the consequences of these kinds of things. The poison coming out of the ocean when the ecosystem's permanently changed. My children will have to live through that. My grandchildren might not live at all. And this is why I'm here. Because the multifaceted and not just double-pronged, triple-pronged, but incredibly diverse crisis that the entire world, possibly the only world with life, is facing, I feel it would be a complete crime to not do anything. Yeah. I'm making my own life so much harder, but I don't have a choice. And that's why I have this call to action, and that's why I feel that so many more people need to be getting involved in this party and others like it around the world, because there simply is not much time. Che Guevara said, "History sometimes needs a push. Now is your time." Thank you.
Thank you, Ethan. A very, very brave statement, and it's very brave to put yourself out and express your beliefs in a system which has far more political policing and repression, as we've seen, than is immediately apparent. But you're absolutely right. Capitalism has no social control over its phenomenon. Marx said in the Communist Manifesto that the capitalist stands like a sorcerer's apprentice, a victim of the incredible productive forces that his system has conjured up, but unable to control them, unable to control the social consequences, unable to control the environmental consequences, unable to plan, unable to make this most basic rational decision. George Galloway, who had me on his show when I was released, and I was very grateful to George for that, used to want me to come and speak about COVID during the COVID crisis, and it wasn't my first subject to speak about. I'm a medical doctor, but I have no particular interest or qualification in virology, as people have pointed out to me. But you can make yourself learn about anything and become an expert in anything. But what was most salient to me about that time was the fact that actually the capitalist world had no ability to manage the resources in a rational way that could have minimized the impact without the need for any further technology or waiting for any invention. Through simple measures of quarantine, through looking after the sick, through commandeering buildings and using them appropriately, we could have stopped it through rationalizing a response, actually in the way that China did. We could have stopped the spread of COVID in our country and averted many, many deaths. Yes, of the elderly, yes, of the sick, but they're human lives for all that, as many of you know, who will have elderly and sick relatives, how valuable they are as human beings. Our system has no respect for human life. It is unable, even the very wealthy, with all their power, are unable to do anything but act as capital personified. They have to make more money, that's all they can do, and they can't solve the very problems of existence of humanity. And that, above all, is why we can't let the system just drag on indefinitely, or just stand there on, looking at, well, that's legal relations, that property relations, that's the law. The law is that this is fine and we can't do anything about it. It's like the policemen who are just following orders. If we just follow orders, then we'll all go down. So we have to engage our brain. I would say what is right, what is moral, what is just. We can write new law and devise new conditions for society. And if we can't do that, then frankly, we all deserve the fate is going to fall on us. But I have great confidence in humanity as a problem-solving and a thinking ape, thinking human beings, that we can solve that problem. So please make common cause with us, join us. Anyone had enough? Anyone for any more? I think we had a fantastic meeting, some brilliant contributions. I think I'm really happy to wrap the meeting up. Thanks again, all of you, for joining, and thanks for joining us on the stream.
Thank you.